more you've seen, have you seen that people really stay the same? Or have you seen people as whole and as individuals change?
Well, I think it's an interesting question, but there's a question you need to ask before that, and that is what can change? I haven't changed that much over 40 years, but what has changed is the context. Characteristically, I wasn't that different to how I am now. I was still relentlessly competitive. It just manifests itself in slightly different ways. I don't cry when I lose, but I used to. Those characteristics have remained very, very constant. So when I say we need to be clear about what changes, what changes are the experiences that we acquire over the course of our careers. And that teaches us to either moderate or extenuate certain characteristics that we've got. But the question to ask yourself is, if you do have a partner in life, what success have you had in changing their characteristics over the course of the time that you've known them? So if there are irritating things that your partner does, and you've tried to change it, how much luck have you had with that? And most people at that point crack out in laughter because, of course, the idea that you're going to change is ridiculous. But here's what does change. You learn to accommodate certain things. You learn to live with it. You adapt. So the characteristics of the person don't change, and your attitude towards those characteristics don't change. They're still irritating. What changes is how you handle it. And if you think about that from a leadership perspective, then, we've got a whole world out there thinking that you can train people to do anything. You can't. And we should stop lying to people about this. If you want to pick nuts off a tree, don't hire a tortoise, hire a squirrel. Squirrels are brilliant at picking nuts off a tree. Now you could teach a tortoise to do it, and maybe they could pick one or two. But what's the return on that effort? It's really, really limited. We don't change anywhere near as much as we think we do. And so we live in this pretense. And that pretense is, I manage myself differently now. I've learned over experience not to say this in this environment, but to ask questions in this environment. I've learned to keep my mouth shut and let other people speak before I speak. So our characteristics are still there. They're not different. We're just managing them in more effective ways.
Likeability isn't a predictor of future job performance. And neither are the companies that you've worked in, how far you went in college, or any of the things that people typically list on their resume. None of those things predict future job performance. So it's the very reason why we can get someone who might be brilliant in an interview where we build up a ton of confidence about what we think they're going to be like in the job. And then we plug them in and then we find out otherwise, right? Every manager has had this experience where they've had this brilliant candidate in an interview. Everyone they've interviewed felt really good, really positive about them, but yet how they perform in the job isn't what we thought it was going to be. So none of the things we typically look at are a really good indicator of future performance. One of the first questions I ask some managers that I'm working with is, tell me what kind of candidate you're looking for. Describe it. And they'll always describe aspects of talent. So when they talk about, I need a really good problem solver, or I need someone who's going to be the relational glue in an organization that's otherwise really dissatisfied right now. Or they talk about someone who can put good processes in place, right? These are all illustrations of very specific talents that we can measure in people. And then we study the outcome, right? So they don't always take our advice. They don't always listen to us when we say, do not move them forward. Then we just look at what happens. We're usually right.
I was like, do you have a stack of I told you so cards?
We do have. we definitely have those.
There are 5 talents that really matter. The first one is setting direction. So establishing a course. The second thing is harnessing energy. And that means, you got to motivate people, you got to motivate yourself. The third component is exerting pressure. Leaders need to change people's minds. The fourth element is improving connectivity. The fifth element is controlling traffic. And controlling traffic is how you think about the way that you manage complex operation. So the 5 talents that really matter is our explanation of the critical elements that predict the top performing leaders. Now, not everybody is going to be good at all of them, but you need to be good at enough of them. The way we've talked about leadership in the past is immature, inaccurate, and ineffective. We've either said leadership is a million things and we've complicated it, or we've been even more silly and said it really only boils down to this one thing, like, I don't know, humility. Okay? Well, goodness me, that's just not true at all. So we deconstruct a lot of nonsense that's been written about leadership over the last 40 years or so.
There are unchanging elements of who people are that drive very good performance in leadership roles. Now, Barry said not everyone will have them, or people will have them to different degrees. So what we wanted to do with this book is give people a means of give people a very clear language and a means of identifying the characteristics in themselves that might lend to more effective leadership, and to help them think about where they spend their time if they're going to develop those. Usually, I think one of the mistakes we make in our culture is thinking that we should be well-rounded people who are just good at everything, right? Or that we should focus on the weaknesses that we have and try and coach those to just get a little bit better. But that's not how you get the best performance out of people. We got to help people understand how they're unique and what talents make them stand out. Because the more interesting question is, how good could you be in those areas?
One of the questions I often ask the CEOs we work with is, how good are you at recruiting leaders? Nobody's ever said I'm bad. So what's your hit rate? Of your last 10 appointments, how many turned out to be above average performers? And they look at me and they say, well, maybe, I don't know, maybe 6. I said, so what you're really saying is you don't know. You should have a number. These are people, by the way, who measure widgets to microns of tolerance. They can tell you how many widgets are in transit between Indonesia and Cape Town. They go into this inordinate detail. Most important thing of all, well, I think it's about 6 out of 10. It's as good as they can get. And we think it's an embarrassment and we need to change it.
If you enjoy this podcast, please make sure to subscribe. And to stay updated on everything that the Action Catalyst is up to, make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Action Catalyst Podcast, and on Twitter at Catalyst_Action. And thanks for listening.